Before the Celts set foot on the British Isles, the isolated island was in a primitive civilization reliant on hunting and gathering. The mysterious indigenous people of Britain had extremely rudimentary tools and religious beliefs. However, under such backward conditions, they managed to construct the enigmatic Stonehenge. Later, Stonehenge became the most famous and mysterious prehistoric relic in the British Isles. Around 700 BCE, the Celts, a remnant ethnic group of the Indo-European peoples, migrated westward from Eastern Europe, crossing the sea to reach Britain. They brought the Iron Age civilization to the island, along with warfare and their kings. As the Celts developed Britain, the island's primitive hunting and gathering society transitioned into an agricultural civilization. The Celts gradually became the dominant inhabitants of the island, introducing agricultural practices and laying the initial foundation of British civilization. In the mid-1st century BCE, Rome launched its campaign to conquer Gaul. At that time, Britain had close trade relations with Gaul. Roman general Julius Caesar suspected that Britain and Gaul were secretly colluding to resist Roman expansion. Using this as a pretext, Caesar launched an attack on Britain. However, in the early stages, he failed to conquer the island. The person who truly brought Britain into the Roman Empire was Emperor Claudius. In 43 CE, Roman forces launched another campaign against Britain. Although the Celts resisted fiercely, they were swiftly defeated by the well-trained and highly organized Roman army. From then on, Claudius completed Rome's conquest of Britain. After the expansion in Britain ended, Rome's domestic policies on the island rapidly flourished. Christianity spread quickly under Roman protection, and Britain underwent rapid Romanization. Rome ruled Britain for nearly 400 years. However, as the Roman Empire declined, it could no longer sustain control over Britain. Thus, in the early 5th century, the Romans withdrew from Britain, marking the end of Roman rule over the island. After the Romans withdrew, the Anglo-Saxons invaded Britain and gradually became the dominant inhabitants of the island, which then began to be called England. Over the next 400 years, 7 kingdoms emerged on the island, reminiscent of the Warring States period in China, with feudal lords vying for dominance. By the 9th century, the Kingdom of Wessex rose to power. Wessex, much like the Qin dynasty during the Warring States period, successively defeated the other 6 kingdoms, ending the era of the 7 kingdoms rivalry on the island and achieving the unification of England. However, in the late 8th and early 9th centuries, the Vikings, a group of seafaring Norse pirates, launched large-scale invasions of Britain. They captured cities, plundered lands, and continuously harassed Wessex. In several battles against the Vikings, the Kingdom of Wessex suffered defeats and had to pay heavy tributes to secure peace. In 871, Alfred ascended to the throne of the Wessex dynasty. Alfred can be likened to a version of China's Qin Shi Huang. After taking power, he initiated sweeping military reforms, built fortified strongholds, and organized forces to counter the Viking raids and defend the land. Under Alfred's rule, Britain entered a period of prolonged peace. In the process of resisting the Vikings, Alfred managed to unite all of England. From Alfred's reign onwards, 5 successive kings of his lineage were strong rulers who defeated repeated Viking invasions and restored Saxon dominance in England. Domestically, Alfred implemented a series of significant reforms. He issued the Alfred Code and oversaw the compilation of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Additionally, through a system of household registration, he placed residents under government administration. These measures fostered a cultural identity for the people of Britain as English. Alfred the Great unified the early cultural and political landscape of England. With his exceptional military and political acumen, Alfred became one of the most remarkable monarchs of medieval Europe, widely commemorated by future generations. He is honored as the Father of England. In 1066, Duke William of Normandy in France launched an expedition to England, becoming the King of England and establishing the Norman dynasty. However, the process of William's conquest of England was relatively complex. William was originally a cousin of King Edward of England. Since Edward had no heirs, William had a legitimate claim to the throne, and Edward had even promised to pass the crown to him. William had long harbored ambitions for England across the Channel. However, he believed that Harold, a prominent English nobleman, and the brother of the Queen, had gained the support of the Witan Council of Wise Men, and was chosen as the King of England. This sparked a fierce struggle for the throne between William and Harold. Ultimately, through his ambition and strategic prowess, William decisively defeated Harold in the Battle of Hastings. In December 1066, William entered London and was crowned king. After conquering England, William implemented a series of administrative measures. He introduced the feudal system from continental Europe into England. This marked the beginning of a close connection between England and mainland Europe. However, following the Norman conquest, the fact that the King of England was also a Duke of France led to territorial and succession disputes between the two nations, sowing the seeds for the 100 Years' War between England and France. In 1154, Henry II ascended the throne, ushering in the Plantagenet dynasty. During the Plantagenet reign, the University of Oxford and the University of Cambridge were established, cultivating a large number of talents for England and promoting the development of English culture. Over time, Oxford and Cambridge grew to become two of the most prestigious universities in the world. In 1187, Muslim leader Saladin captured Jerusalem, the holy city of Christianity, shocking the Christian world. In response, a Catholic alliance comprising the armies of the Kingdom of England, the Kingdom of France, and the Holy Roman Empire launched the Third Crusade. The campaign ended with a truce between the alliance and the Muslim world. King Richard I of England participated in the crusade, marking the first time the English army played a significant role in the Crusades, expanding England's influence on its eastern advance. In 1199, Richard I passed away, and his brother John ascended the throne. During John's reign, he suffered repeated defeats in foreign wars, forcing him to impose heavy taxes to fund his campaigns. He also clashed with the Pope over the appointment of bishops and alienated many nobles by attempting to eliminate opposition. These actions sparked fierce resistance from the English nobility, leading to a civil war. In 1215, representatives of the nobility and the king engaged in negotiations. To limit the king's power, the nobles forced King John to sign the Magna Carta. Under pressure, John reluctantly agreed. However, after signing, he regretted his decision and tore up the document. This angered the nobles, who prepared to rise against him again. The struggle between the two sides continued until John's death. His son, Henry III, succeeded to the throne. Being young and in need of noble support, Henry III was compelled to adhere to the terms of the Magna Carta. However, during the tug-of-war for power, the Magna Carta was repeatedly revised and reaffirmed when royal authority was weak. It was used to limit the king when royal authority was strong. It was ignored, and when different classes sought power, it became a tool in their struggles. Over time, the Magna Carta evolved into a constitutional document for England. Countries like Japan and the United States later learned from England's constitutional system, making the Magna Carta known as the Mother of Constitutions. When Henry III began ruling on his own, he sought to escape the constraints of the English nobility by favoring many French relatives and nobles. This led to continuous conflicts between foreign and local nobles. Furthermore, Henry III failed to reclaim the lands lost by his father, John, and suffered further defeats, prompting him to increase taxes again and trigger another noble rebellion. In 1258, Simon de Montfort, Henry III's brother-in-law, led a fully armed force to compel the king to sign the provisions of Oxford, which demanded the establishment of a permanent council to handle state affairs alongside the king, particularly concerning taxation. To gain the support of the free populace, the nobles initiated several legislative reforms, forming the Statute of Westminster, which granted certain rights to free citizens. Henry III readily agreed to these terms, seeking stability and the nobles' support to quickly raise funds. However, once he secured the money, Henry III immediately reneged, abolishing the provisions and exiling Simon de Montfort. In 1264, the nobles, fed up with Henry III, directly waged war against him, sparking the Second Barons' War, which lasted from 1264 to 1267. During the war, the nobles invited Simon de Montfort back, and he successfully defeated the king. In handling state affairs, Simon and the nobles bypassed the king, using a parliament to manage governance. This parliament, known as the Simon de Montfort Parliament, marked the beginning of England's modern parliamentary system. While England had a tradition of assemblies dating back to the Anglo-Saxon period, they were mainly elder councils. After the Norman conquest, assemblies included court officials, senior clergy, and feudal nobles. The Simon de Montfort Parliament, however, proposed that state affairs be discussed in Parliament first and that participants should include not only the king and nobles but also citizens. Thus, it became the starting point for England's modern parliamentary system. Simon de Montfort, originally a French nobleman, sought to reform the king's policies, much like the English nobles. However, his growing power dissatisfied some local nobles. Additionally, loyalty to the king remained a strong sentiment among the English nobility. Under the leadership of Prince Edward, the English nobles defeated Simon's forces, restored Henry III to the throne, and abolished the provisions of Oxford. Although the provisions were repealed, the valuable parliamentary system remained intact. When Edward I ascended the throne, he continued to uphold these provisions and the parliamentary system to balance the relationship between the king, the nobles, and the common people, solidifying England's political framework. During England's internal conflicts, Wales took advantage of the turmoil to promote its independence movement. At the time, King Llewellyn ap Griffith of Gwynedd signed the Treaty of Montgomery with Henry III, declaring himself as the Prince of Wales. Henry III recognized Gwyneth's rule over Wales. However, as a prince, Llewellyn was still required to perform acts of fealty and pay tribute to the English king, somewhat resembling the status of a subordinate state. Later, Llewellyn violated this agreement, and when Edward I ascended the throne, he decided to address the situation in Wales. In 1277, Edward I mobilized an army of 15,000 to march into Wales. By 1284, Edward I had fully conquered Wales and enacted the Statute of Rutherlan, officially incorporating Wales into England's territory, laying the foundation for the formation of modern-day Britain. In 1400, a Welsh nobleman named Owain Glyndwr, dissatisfied with the rule of King Henry IV of England, openly rebelled but was eventually suppressed by the English forces. After this, England strengthened its control over Wales. In 1536, the Acts of Union were passed, fully integrating Wales into England, unifying their political and legal systems. English also became one of the official languages of Wales. After subjugating Wales, Edward I turned his attention to Scotland, aiming to bring it under English rule. Scotland, one of the three major regions of the British Isles, had always maintained its own kingdom and cultural traditions. As England grew stronger, Scotland's northern territory became an enticing target. In 1290, the Scottish Queen passed away without an heir. Edward I saw this as an opportunity and installed a puppet government to control Scotland. However, this move was met with fierce resistance from the Scottish people. Eventually, Edward abandoned the pretense and directly marched north, suppressing and crushing the Scottish rebels. Edward believed that Scotland was firmly under his control. But as soon as he left, a widespread resistance movement against English rule erupted across Scotland. During the Scottish Wars of Independence, a brilliant military leader named William Wallace emerged. In 1297, Wallace led a small army to a remarkable victory against the English at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, defeating a much larger force and gaining widespread fame. This victory earned Wallace the support of the Scottish nobility, who appointed him as Guardian of Scotland, placing him at the helm of the independence movement. However, as the saying goes, the tallest tree catches the most wind. Wallace's courage and fame infuriated Edward. In 1298, Edward I assembled a massive army and engaged Wallace in a decisive battle. Despite his valor, Wallace was no match for Edward in terms of military strength and strategy, and he suffered a crushing defeat. Wallace sought assistance from the Scottish nobility, but they declined to help, offering only hollow words of encouragement. The harsh reality was that the nobles did not genuinely support Wallace, they merely used him as a tool to resist the English. After his defeat, Wallace continued to wage guerrilla warfare against the English but was eventually captured and brought to London, where he endured a brutal execution. However, Wallace's death did not deter the Scottish people's resolve for independence. In 1314, under the leadership of Robert the Bruce, the Scots achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of Bannockburn, securing Scotland's independence. The continued independence movement in Scotland, however, became an enduring issue. Ultimately, England sought to merge with Scotland through a royal union. In 1603, King James VI of Scotland inherited the English throne, becoming James I of England. This event officially united Scotland and England into a shared monarchy while maintaining separate administrations. From 1337 to 1453, due to disputes over the royal succession and territorial claims, England and France were engaged in a prolonged conflict known as the 100 Years' War. After the Norman conquest, since the King of England was also a Duke of France, the two nations had been in constant dispute over territories and inheritance. Despite this, they maintained a fragile balance, and their relationship remained ambiguous and unclear. In 1328, King Charles IV of France passed away without an heir, marking the end of the Capetian dynasty. The issue of royal succession shattered the delicate balance. Charles IV had no sons or brothers, but King Edward III of England, his nephew through his sister, had a legitimate claim to the throne under inheritance law. However, this was rejected by the French Estates General, who instead crowned a distant cousin of Charles IV as king. This enraged Edward III, leading to the outbreak of the 100 Years' War. From the start of the war until 1360, England achieved remarkable victories. Under the leadership of Edward III and later Henry V, the war continued for over a century, with England winning more often than losing. France repeatedly had to cede territories or pay reparations, particularly during the reign of Henry V. He led the English army deep into French territory, capturing Paris and northern France, and regaining control of Normandy. In 1421, England and France signed the Treaty of Troyes, which ceded a significant portion of French territory to England and compelled France to marry a princess to Henry V. However, England, blinded by its victories, continued its campaigns. In 1428, the English besieged Orleans, pushing France to the brink of destruction. At this critical juncture, French morale was reignited, and the tide quickly turned. The English army suffered a series of defeats, and nearly all their occupied territories were lost. Finally, in 1453, England and France signed a peace treaty, officially ending the 100 Years' War. England was driven off the European continent, losing nearly all its occupied French territories. From then on, England focused on internal matters within the British Isles, laying the foundation for the formation of the English nation-state. After completing the 100 Years' War between England and France, let us turn our attention back to England's internal affairs during this period. Following the outbreak of the 100 Years' War, to enhance the combat effectiveness of soldiers and gain support from various factions, Edward III established the Order of the Garter and the Knights of the Garter. The knightly order formed by Edward III used the Order of the Garter as its emblem. Subsequently, the Order of the Garter became the highest honor and distinction in England. The Knights of the Garter differed from the prominent knightly orders of the time in continental Europe, such as the Teutonic Knights, the Templars, and the Hospitallers. The Knights of the Garter were the first secular knightly order, established to protect the nation, whereas the other orders were dedicated to defending religious faith.